The blood had dried in rusty streaks down her chin, and when she tried to open her mouth to take water from the trough, the pain shot through her jaw like lightning through storm clouds. Penelope Vaughn pressed trembling fingers to her swollen lips, feeling where Russell's rings had split the tender flesh, and wondered if this time he had finally broken something that would not heal. The Nevada sun beat down merciless on Gold Hill's dusty main street, and she swayed on her feet, gripping the rough wood of the water trough to keep from collapsing right there in front of the general store where anyone might see her shame. She had learned 3 years ago when Russell Vaughn first brought her to this mining town as his bride. That screaming only made things worse. The neighbors heard everything through the thin walls of the company houses, but no one ever came knocking. A man's wife was his property, same as his horse or his mining claim, and what he did with his property was his own business. So Penelope had learned to be silent, to take the blows without crying out, to absorb his rage like the desert earth absorbed the rare rain, hoping that one day the ground would be saturated enough to refuse anymore. But last night had been different. Last night she had talked back. The bruises on her throat were shaped like fingerprints, purple and yellow blooms of violence that her threadbare collar could not quite hide. When Russell had stumbled home from the saloon, whiskey-soaked and mean, she had been preparing his supper. He had knocked the pot from the stove, scattering beans and salt pork across the floor, and then he had looked at her with those cold gray eyes and told her she was lucky he kept her, that no other man would want such a worthless creature. Something inside Penelope had snapped. Maybe it was the way he said it, with such casual certainty, as if her worthlessness was a fact as plain as the color of the sky. Maybe it was the letter she had received that morning from her sister in San Francisco, full of news about suffrage meetings and women who owned their own businesses. Maybe it was just that after 3 years of silence, her voice had decided it would not stay locked away any longer. She had told him that she hated him. She had told him that marriage to him was a prison worse than any jail cell. She had told him that she wished he would die in the mines like so many other men, crushed under a ton of rock where his body would never be found. Russell had beaten her so badly that she lost consciousness. When she woke this morning, he was gone, the door hanging open, his mining clothes missing from the peg. She did not know if he had left for his shift or if he would be back. She only knew that she could not stay in that house another night. The problem was that she had nowhere to go. Her family was in California, nearly 200 miles away across desert and mountains that might as well have been oceans. She had no money. Russell kept every penny of his wages locked in a box only he had the key to. She had no friends in Gold Hill. The other miners' wives regarded her with a mixture of pity and suspicion, as if her misfortune might be contagious. She was trapped as surely as if Russell had chained her to the floor. Penelope splashed water on her face, gasping as the cool liquid hit her split lips. She needed to think. She needed a plan. But her head felt stuffed with cotton, and every breath hurt, and all she could think about was how much she wanted to lie down somewhere safe and sleep for 1,000 years. "Madam, you all right?" The voice came from behind her, low and concerned, with the slow drawl of Texas or maybe Oklahoma. Penelope straightened quickly, ignoring the way the world tilted sideways, and turned to face the stranger. He was tall, this cowboy, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin that spoke of days spent in the saddle under the open sky. His clothes were dusty from travel, his boots worn but well cared for, and he wore his gun belt with the easy confidence of a man who knew how to use it but did not feel the need to prove anything. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, brown and warm as creek stones, looking at her with genuine concern that made her throat tighten with something that might have been tears if she had any left. "I am fine," Penelope said, and winced at how her swollen mouth mangled the words. "Thank you for your concern." The cowboy's expression darkened as he took in the full extent of her injuries, the bruises on her face and throat, the way she held herself as if expecting another blow. His jaw tightened, and one hand moved unconsciously toward his gun before he caught himself and forced it back to his side. "Begging your pardon, madam, but you do not look fine." He took a careful step closer, moving slowly as if approaching a spooked horse. "That is, if you will forgive my saying so." Penelope wanted to tell him to mind his own business, to walk away and forget he had ever seen her, but her body betrayed her, swaying again. And suddenly the cowboy's hand was on her elbow, steadying her with a grip that was gentle but firm. "Easy now," he said softly. "When did you last eat something?" She could not remember. Yesterday morning, perhaps, before Russell came home. The hours had blurred together in a haze of pain and fear. "I do not know," she admitted, and hated how weak her voice sounded. The cowboy's mouth pressed into a grim line. He glanced around the street, taking in the few people who were watching with varying degrees of interest, and seemed to come to some decision. "My name is Wade Sutton," he said. "I am just passing through Gold Hill on my way to California, but I would consider it a personal favor if you would let me buy you a meal. There is a restaurant over there that looks decent enough." Penelope knew she should refuse. A respectable married woman did not accept invitations from strange men, no matter how kind they seemed. But the word married felt like a stone in her mouth, heavy and bitter, and she was so tired of doing what she was supposed to do. "My husband," she began, then stopped. What could she say? "My husband beats me? My husband would kill me if he saw me talking to you?" Both statements were true, but speaking them out loud felt dangerous, as if giving voice to her reality might somehow make it worse. "Your husband," Wade Sutton said carefully, "is the one who hurt you, I am guessing?" The directness of the question shocked her. In Gold Hill, everyone knew about Russell's temper, but no one ever spoke of it. It was an open secret, the kind of truth that existed in the space between words, acknowledged but never named. Penelope nodded just once and felt something crack inside her chest. Wade's expression went very still, in the way that dangerous things go still before they strike. But when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "Then I reckon your husband can go to hell," he said. "Come on, madam, let me get you something to eat, and then we can figure out what to do next." The restaurant was a small establishment tucked between the assayer's office and a dry goods store, with checkered curtains in the windows, and the smell of fresh bread drifting through the door. Wade guided Penelope to a table in the back corner where they would be less visible to anyone passing by on the street, and ordered beef stew and cornbread from the proprietor, a plump woman with kind eyes who took one look at Penelope's face and brought an extra portion without being asked. Penelope tried to eat, but her jaw ached with every chew, and after a few bites, she had to stop. Wade watched her struggle, his food untouched, and finally pushed his chair back. "Wait here," he said, and went to speak with the proprietor in low tones. The woman nodded and disappeared into the back, returning a moment later with a bowl of broth and some soft bread that had been soaked in milk. "This will be easier," Wade said, setting the bowl in front of Penelope. "Take your time." The kindness was almost worse than the beating. Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes, hot and shameful, and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. She had not cried when Russell hit her, and she would not cry now in front of this stranger who had no reason to care about her suffering. But Wade seemed to understand. He turned his attention to his own meal, giving her privacy to compose herself, and when he spoke again, his tone was conversational, as if they were old friends sharing a meal rather than two strangers brought together by violence. "I have been on the trail for near about 6 weeks now," he said, sopping up stew with his cornbread. "Coming from Texas originally, but I have been working cattle drives up through Kansas and Nebraska. Figured it was time to see California before I get too old to appreciate it." "California is beautiful," Penelope said softly, grateful for the distraction. "I grew up in San Francisco. My father was a merchant there." "What brought you to Nevada?" The question was innocent enough, but the answer was complicated. Penelope sipped the broth, feeling it soothe her throat, and tried to find words that would explain without revealing too much. "I met Russell at a dance," she said finally. "He was in the city buying equipment for the mine. He was charming, attentive. My father had died the year before, and my mother was struggling to make ends meet. When Russell proposed after a 2-week courtship, it seemed like the answer to our prayers. A husband with steady work, a home of my own. I thought I was fortunate. And he did not show his true nature until after the wedding, I am guessing." Penelope nodded. "The first time he hit me was on our wedding night. I had said something he did not like. I cannot even remember what. He apologized the next morning, said it would never happen again, but it did happen again and again, until I stopped counting the times and just learned to survive them." Wade was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "You know it is not right what he does to you. You know that, do not you?" "Of course I know that," Penelope said, and was surprised by the flash of anger in her voice. "But knowing does not change anything. I have no money, no way to support myself. Where would I go? What would I do? A woman alone with no husband, no family nearby, I would be worse than destitute. I would be ruined." "You are already ruined if you stay with him," Wade said bluntly. "Next time he might kill you. Men like that, they do not stop. They only get worse." Penelope knew he was right. She had known it for years, in the dark, secret places of her heart that she tried not to examine too closely, but hearing someone else say it out loud made it real in a way that terrified her. "I cannot leave," she whispered. "I have nowhere to go." Wade leaned forward, his brown eyes intent on her face. "Yes, you can. You can come with me." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and tempting. Penelope stared at him, trying to understand what he was offering. "Come with you?" she repeated. "I do not understand." "I am heading to California," Wade said. "You have family there, you said. I can get you to San Francisco safely. Once you are there, you can stay with your mother and sister until you figure out your next step. You can file for divorce, start over." "Divorce?" The word felt foreign on her tongue. She had never known anyone who was divorced. It was scandalous, shameful, a mark of failure that would follow her for the rest of her life. But was it more shameful than staying with a man who beat her? Was it worse than dying slowly by inches under Russell's fists? "I have no money," she said, testing the idea, looking for the flaw in Wade's plan. "I cannot pay you for your trouble." "I am not asking for payment," Wade said. "I am offering help because it is the right thing to do, because no woman should have to live in fear of the man who is supposed to protect her." Penelope felt something shift inside her, like a door that had been locked for years suddenly swinging open. She thought of her sister's letter, of the women in San Francisco who were fighting for the right to vote, to own property, to control their own lives. She thought of the vast desert between here and California, full of dangers but also possibilities. She thought of what would happen if she went back to that house, to Russell and his rage. "He will come after me," she said. "If I leave, he will not just let me go." "Then we will make sure he does not find you," Wade said. "We can leave tonight as soon as it gets dark. By the time he realizes you are gone, we will be halfway to the California border." It was insane. It was reckless. It was the most dangerous thing Penelope had ever considered doing. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I will come with you." Wade's face broke into a smile, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his features from merely handsome to something that made her heart skip in her chest. "Good," he said, "and that is real good. Now, do you have anything at your house you need to collect? Clothes, personal items?" Penelope thought of the little house with its bloodstains on the floor, its atmosphere of misery and fear. There was nothing there she wanted to keep, nothing that mattered more than her freedom. "No," she said, "I have nothing I need." "Then we will get you some supplies before we leave. You cannot cross the desert in that dress. You need riding clothes and a canteen and some other things. I have enough money to outfit us both." "I cannot let you spend your money on me," Penelope protested, but Wade waved her objection away. "You can pay me back once you are settled in San Francisco if it bothers you that much," he said. "But right now, The important thing is getting you out of Gold Hill alive and in one piece." They spent the rest of the afternoon making preparations. Wade took Penelope to the general store and bought her a split skirt suitable for riding, a wide-brimmed hat to protect her from the sun, sturdy boots, and a bedroll. He also purchased extra water canteens, dried beef, hardtack, and other supplies for the journey. The store clerk raised his eyebrows at the sight of them together, but Wade's level stare kept any questions unspoken. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Wade collected his horse from the livery stable and rented a second mount for Penelope. His own horse was a tall bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm temperament, while Penelope's was a sturdy pinto mare that seemed gentle enough for someone who had not ridden in 3 years. "We will take the southern route," Wade explained, as he secured their supplies to the horses. "It is longer, but it keeps us away from the main roads where your husband might think to look for you. There are a few towns along the way where we can rest and resupply, but mostly it will be camping under the stars." Penelope nodded, her stomach tight with a mixture of fear and excitement. She had changed into the riding clothes in the back room of the general store, and the freedom of the split skirt felt almost scandalous after years of heavy petticoats and restrictive corsets. Her body still ached from Russell's beating, but the pain felt different now, not like the beginning of something, but like the end. They waited until full dark before leaving Gold Hill, slipping out of town on a narrow trail that led south into the desert. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see by, and Wade set a steady pace that ate up the miles without exhausting the horses. Penelope focused on staying in the saddle, on the rhythm of the mare's gait, on the cool night air that smelled of sage and dust and possibility. By the time the sun rose over the eastern mountains, Gold Hill was far behind them, just another mining town in a territory full of them, and Penelope Vaughn was beginning to believe that she might actually escape. They traveled for 3 days through country that seemed to exist outside of time, all red rock and endless sky and silence broken only by the wind and the occasional cry of a hawk. Wade proved to be a capable guide, finding water sources that were not marked on any map, choosing campsites that were sheltered from the wind and safe from flash floods. He was patient with Penelope's inexperience, showing her how to care for her horse, how to build a fire that would not be visible from a distance, how to read the signs of weather in the clouds. At night, they slept on opposite sides of the fire, maintaining a respectful distance that Penelope appreciated. Wade was unfailingly polite, never presuming on the intimacy that their circumstances might have invited. He treated her like a lady, like someone worthy of respect, and it was so different from Russell's brutality that sometimes she had to remind herself it was real. On the 4th day, they reached a small town called Desert Springs, which consisted of little more than a general store, a saloon, and a boarding house that rented rooms by the night. Wade suggested they rest there for a day, give the horses a break, and resupply their provisions. The boarding house was run by an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, whose Chinese parents had come to Nevada during the first silver rush. She took one look at the fading bruises on Penelope's face and asked no questions, simply showing them to 2 clean rooms on the 2nd floor and bringing up hot water for washing. Penelope scrubbed 3 days of trail dust from her skin and felt almost human again. Her jaw had healed enough that she could eat solid food without wincing, and the bruises on her throat had faded from purple to a sickly yellow-green that her collar could almost hide. When she looked at herself in the small mirror over the washstand, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Her hair had come loose from its pins and hung in wild waves around her face, and her skin had darkened from the sun despite the hat. She looked like someone who belonged to the desert, someone strong and capable and free. That evening, Wade invited her to join him for dinner in the boarding house dining room. Mrs. Chen served roasted chicken with potatoes and carrots, and Penelope ate until she thought she might burst, marveling at how good real food tasted after days of hardtack and dried beef. "You're getting better at riding," Wade observed, pouring her more water from the pitcher on the table. "By the time we reach California, you will be a regular horsewoman." "I'm not sure about that," Penelope said, but she smiled. "Though I must admit there is something wonderful about being in the saddle. about covering all that ground under your own power. Freedom, Wade said simply. That is what it is, nothing between you and the horizon but your own choices. Penelope studied him in the lamplight. This man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known she was praying. He had saved her, was saving her still, and she knew almost nothing about him. Why did you help me? She asked. That day in Gold Hill you could have just walked past. Most people would have. Why did you stop? Wade was quiet for a long moment, turning his glass in his hands. When he spoke, his voice was low and serious. When I was a boy, maybe 10 or 11, my father used to beat my mother, he said. Not often, but when he got in his cups, when things went wrong at the ranch, he would take it out on her. She never fought back, never complained, just took it, and then got up the next morning and made his breakfast like nothing had happened. What did you do? Penelope asked softly. Nothing, Wade said, and the word was heavy with old guilt. I was just a kid, and he was my father. I did not know what to do. Then one night when I was about 15, he came home drunk and started in on her worse than usual. Something in me just snapped. I grabbed the fire poker and told him if he touched her again, I would kill him. Did he stop? He tried to come at me instead, but I was already as big as him by then and sober besides. I laid him out with one swing. When he came to, I told him he had a choice. He could leave and never come back, or he could stay, and I would finish what I started. He left that same night. We never saw him again. Penelope reached across the table and touched Wade's hand. A brief pressure of sympathy. You saved her. I should have saved her sooner, Wade said. I should have done something the first time, or the second, or the 100th. So when I saw you at that water trough, hurting and alone, I knew I could not walk past. I could not be that boy again, doing nothing while someone suffered. You are a good man, Wade Sutton, Penelope said, and meant it with her whole heart. Wade looked at her, and something passed between them, a current of understanding that went deeper than words. He turned his hand under hers so their palms pressed together, and Penelope felt heat bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the warm room. We should get some rest, Wade said, but he did not pull his hand away. We have a long ride tomorrow. Yes, Penelope agreed, but neither of them moved. Finally, reluctantly, Wade stood and helped Penelope to her feet. They walked up the stairs together, and at the door to her room he paused. Penelope, he said, using her first name for the first time, if you ever want to go back, if you change your mind about leaving, I will understand. I will take you back to Gold Hill, no questions asked. I will not change my mind, Penelope said firmly. I am never going back to that life. Never. Wade smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. Good, he said. Sleep well. Penelope lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling around her. She thought about Russell, wondered if he was looking for her, or if he had already moved on, found some other woman to torment. She thought about her mother and sister in San Francisco, about how surprised they would be when she showed up on their doorstep. But mostly she thought about Wade, about the feel of his hand in hers, about the way he looked at her like she was someone worth saving. She was falling in love with him. The realization came quietly, without fanfare, but it was undeniable. Somewhere between Gold Hill and Desert Springs, between the terror of escape and the hope of freedom, she had given her heart to the cowboy who had listened when she could finally speak again. The question was, did he feel the same way? They left Desert Springs at dawn and continued south through increasingly rugged terrain. The desert gave way to foothills, and the foothills to mountains, pine-covered slopes that climbed toward a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Wade explained that they were skirting the Sierra Nevada range, looking for a pass that would take them through to California without the risks of the higher elevations. As they climbed, the air grew cooler and thinner. Penelope found herself breathing hard, and Wade adjusted their pace to account for the altitude. They stopped frequently to rest the horses and drink water, and during these breaks Wade began to tell her stories about his life on the trail, about cattle drives and stampedes, and nights spent under stars so thick they looked like spilled salt. Penelope listened, fascinated by this life that was so different from her own. She told him about San Francisco, about the fog that rolled in from the bay and the sound of ships' bells in the harbor. She told him about her father's store, how she used to help him with the accounts and serve customers. She told him about her dreams of becoming a teacher before Russell had convinced her that marriage was the only future worth having. "You could still be a teacher," Wade said. "Once you're settled in California, you could go to normal school, get your certificate." "I am 26 years old," Penelope said. "Too old to start over." "You are not too old for anything," Wade said firmly. "My mother, after my father left, she started over. She took in sewing, built up a business doing alterations and making clothes for the ladies in town. By the time she died 5 years ago, she owned her own shop and had 3 women working for her. She was 50 years old when she started, and she made it work." "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was. You remind me of her, actually. That same strength, that determination not to let the world break you." Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of pain or fear. They were tears of gratitude, of hope, of something that might have been joy. On the 7th day out from Gold Hill, they reached the pass Wade had been aiming for, a high saddle between 2 peaks where the wind blew cold and fierce. From there they could see California spread out below them, a golden land of valleys and rivers stretching to the distant haze of the Pacific Ocean. "There it is," Wade said, and his voice held a note of awe. "California." Penelope stared at the view, her heart full to bursting. She had made it. Against all odds, against every expectation, she had escaped. She was going home. But as they began the descent into California, as the pines gave way to oaks and the air warmed again, Penelope felt a strange melancholy settle over her. The journey was almost over. Soon they would reach San Francisco, and Wade would deliver her safely to her family. And then what? He would continue on his way, chasing his own dreams of California, and she would be left with nothing but memories of these stolen days in the wilderness. The thought was unbearable. They spent 2 more days traveling through the gold country, passing abandoned mining camps and played-out streams where prospectors had once panned for fortune. The landscape was gentler here, rolling hills covered in grass that had turned golden in the summer heat. They saw more people, too, farmers and ranchers and travelers on the road to Sacramento. On their last night before reaching San Francisco, they made camp beside a creek that ran clear and cold from the mountains. Wade caught fish for their supper, frying them in a pan over the fire while Penelope made coffee and warmed the last of their bread. It was a peaceful scene, domestic in a way that made Penelope's heart ache. After they ate, they sat by the fire and watched the stars come out. Wade was quiet, and Penelope wondered if he was feeling the same sadness at their impending separation. "Wade," she said finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, "what will you do after you leave me with my family?" Wade poked at the fire with a stick, sending up a shower of sparks. "I have been thinking about that," he said. "I was planning to look for work on one of the big ranches, maybe save up enough to start my own spread someday. But lately I have been wondering if that is really what I want." "What do you want?" Penelope asked, her heart beating fast. Wade looked at her across the fire, and in his eyes she saw everything she had been hoping to see, everything she had been afraid to name. "I want to stay with you," he said simply. "I want to make sure you are truly safe, truly free. I want to be there while you build your new life. I want to be part of that life, if you will have me." Penelope felt something break open inside her chest, a flood of emotion so powerful it took her breath away. She stood and walked around the fire to where Wade sat, and he rose to meet her, his hands coming up to cradle her face with infinite gentleness. "I love you," she said, the words spilling out in a rush. "I know it is too soon. I know we barely know each other. But I love you, Wade Sutton. You saved my life, but more than that, you showed me that I was worth saving. You gave me back my voice, my strength, my hope. How could I not love you?" Wade's smile was brilliant in the firelight. "I love you too," he said. "I think I have loved you since that first day in Gold Hill, when you looked at me with those brave, broken eyes and let me help you. You are the strongest woman I have ever met, Penelope Vaughn, and I would be honored to stand beside you for the rest of my life." He kissed her then, carefully, mindful of her still healing mouth, and Penelope felt the last of her fear melt away. This was right. This was real. This was the future she had not dared to dream of. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "We will do this properly," he said. "We will get you to San Francisco, get you settled with your family. We will wait for your divorce to go through, however long that takes. And then if you still want me, I will marry you and spend the rest of my days making sure you never regret it." "I will never regret it," Penelope whispered. "I promise you that." They stayed awake long into the night, talking and planning and stealing kisses that grew longer and deeper as the fire burned down to embers. When they finally slept, it was side by side in the same bedroll, holding each other as if they could keep the world at bay through sheer force of will. They reached San Francisco 2 days later, riding into the city on a foggy afternoon that reminded Penelope powerfully of her childhood. The streets were crowded with wagons and pedestrians, the air full of the sounds of commerce and construction. It had only been 3 years since she had left, but the city had grown, pushing outward and upward with the relentless energy that had always characterized San Francisco. Penelope's mother and sister lived in a modest house in the Mission District, a neighborhood of working-class families and small businesses. When Penelope knocked on the door, it was her sister Clara who answered, and the shock on her face was almost comical. "Penelope," Clara gasped, then threw her arms around her sister with such force that it knocked Penelope back a step. "Penelope, what are you doing here? Why did you not write? Where is Russell? Who is this man with you? Mother, come quick. Penelope is home." The next hour passed in a blur of explanations and tears and introductions. Penelope's mother, Margaret, was a small woman with steel-gray hair and a spine like an iron rod, and she listened to her daughter's story with a face that grew progressively harder. "That bastard," she said when Penelope finished, and the profanity was so out of character that both her daughters stared at her in shock. "I never liked him, never trusted him, but you seemed so happy at the wedding, and I thought perhaps I was just being overprotective." "It is not your fault, Mother," Penelope said. "Russell fooled all of us." Margaret turned her attention to Wade, who had been standing quietly by the door, his hat in his hands. "And you, young man," she said, "you brought my daughter home safely. I am in your debt." "No debt, madam," Wade said. "It was my privilege to help her." Margaret studied him with sharp eyes that missed nothing, taking in the way he looked at Penelope, the way she looked at him. "I see," she said, and a small smile touched her lips. "Well, Mr. Sutton, I hope you will join us for supper. It is the least we can offer in thanks for your service." Over the next weeks, Penelope settled into life with her mother and sister. Clara was 23, 3 years younger than Penelope, and unmarried by choice. She worked as a secretary for a lawyer downtown and was deeply involved in the suffrage movement, attending meetings and rallies with a passion that both inspired and worried their mother. Wade found work at a ranch south of the city, but he came to visit every Sunday, and slowly he became part of the family. Margaret approved of him, Clara adored him, and Penelope counted the days between his visits like a miser counting gold. The process of obtaining a divorce was more complicated than Penelope had hoped. California law required proof of extreme cruelty, and Penelope had to give a deposition detailing the abuse she had suffered. It was humiliating and painful, dredging up memories she would have preferred to bury, but Wade sat beside her through every meeting with the lawyer, holding her hand and giving her the strength to continue. Russell, when he was finally located and served with the divorce papers, contested them. He sent letters full of accusations and demands, claiming that Penelope had abandoned him, that she was an unfit wife who deserved nothing. But the bruises he had left on her face and body were documented by a doctor in Gold Hill who had treated her once before, and the testimony of neighbors who had heard her screams through the walls was damning. 8 months after Penelope fled Gold Hill, the divorce was granted. She was free. Wade proposed that same evening, going down on one knee in Margaret's parlor with a simple gold band he had saved 3 months' wages to buy. "Penelope Vaughn," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you are the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Penelope said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They married in the spring of 1885 in a small ceremony at the church Clara attended, with Margaret and Clara and a few of Wade's friends from the ranch in attendance. Penelope wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton, and she carried wildflowers that Wade had picked that morning. She had never felt more beautiful. After the wedding, they moved to a small ranch that Wade had purchased with money he had been saving for years, combined with a loan from a bank that was surprisingly willing to lend to a man with Wade's reputation for hard work and honesty. It was not much, just 100 acres of good grazing land and a sturdy house that needed some repairs, but to Penelope it was paradise. She threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm, learning to care for cattle and chickens, to preserve food for the winter, to keep accounts and manage the household budget. Wade was patient with her mistakes and generous with his praise, and together they built something that was truly theirs. A year after their wedding, Penelope gave birth to their first child, a boy they named William after Wade's grandfather. He had his father's brown eyes and his mother's stubborn chin, and Penelope loved him with a fierceness that sometimes frightened her. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, Clara Margaret, named for her aunt and grandmother. She was a tiny thing with lungs like an opera singer, and she wrapped her father around her little finger from the moment she was born. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations, of hard work and quiet joys. Penelope learned to ride as well as any cowboy, and Wade learned to cook well enough that Penelope did not have to do it all herself. They argued sometimes about money or child rearing or what color to paint the barn, but they never went to bed angry, and Wade never once raised his hand to her in anything but love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they took the children to visit Margaret and Clara in San Francisco. The city had grown even more in the intervening years, spreading across hills that had once been wild. Clara, now 33, had married a fellow suffragist, a lawyer named David, who shared her passion for justice and was expecting her first child. Margaret, though slowed by arthritis, was still sharp as a tack and delighted in her role as grandmother. That evening, after the children were in bed and the adults were sitting in the parlor with coffee and cake, Margaret raised her cup in a toast. "To my daughters," she said, "both of you have made me proud in ways I never could have imagined. You have built lives of meaning and purpose, and you have done it with courage and grace." "To courage and grace," Clara echoed, and they all drank. Later, when they were alone in the guest room, Wade pulled Penelope into his arms. "Do you ever think about Gold Hill?" he asked, "about what your life would have been if I had not stopped that day?" "Sometimes," Penelope admitted, "but not often. That person, the woman I was then, she feels like someone from another lifetime. You gave me a second chance, Wade. You gave me a life worth living." "You gave yourself that life," Wade said. "I just held your hand while you did the hard work of claiming it." Penelope kissed him, long and deep, pouring into it all the love and gratitude and joy she felt. "We gave it to each other," she said when they finally broke apart. "That is what love is it not? Choosing each other every day and building something beautiful together." "That is exactly what it is," Wade agreed. They stood at the window, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the darkness, and Penelope marveled at how far she had come. From silence to voice, from captivity to freedom, from despair to hope. It had not been easy, and there had been days when she thought the pain would break her. But she had survived, and more than survived, she had thrived. And it all began with a cowboy who had listened when she could speak again, who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself, who had loved her not in spite of her brokenness, but because of the strength she showed in healing. The years continued to unfold with their mix of challenges and triumphs. The ranch prospered under their care, and they were able to expand their holdings, purchasing an adjoining property that gave them access to a year-round creek. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with the horses, while Clara proved to be as fearless as her mother, climbing trees and exploring the hills with the neighboring children. When William was 12 and Clara was 10, Penelope gave birth to another son, Thomas Wade, who arrived 3 weeks early in the middle of a thunderstorm. The local doctor did not make it in time, and Wade delivered the baby himself with Penelope coaching him through it. It was terrifying and beautiful, and afterwards, as Wade placed the squalling infant in Penelope's arms, she saw tears streaming down his face. "I love you," he said, his voice breaking. "I love you so much, Penelope." "I love you too," she said, and knew that those words, spoken so many times over the years, would never lose their power. Penelope also fulfilled her dream of teaching, though not in the way she had originally imagined. She began offering lessons to the children of neighboring ranches, teaching them reading and arithmetic and history in her front room. It started with just 3 students, but word spread about the woman who made learning interesting and fun, and within a few years she had 15 regular pupils and a reputation as the best teacher in the county. Wade supported her completely, even building a small schoolhouse on their property so she would have a proper place to conduct classes. He would sometimes sit in the back of the room during lessons, ostensibly doing paperwork, but actually listening to her teach, and the pride on his face never failed to make Penelope's heart swell. On their 20th anniversary, Wade surprised her with a trip to Yosemite Valley, leaving the children with Margaret and Clara for a week. They spent their days hiking through forests of giant sequoias and marveling at waterfalls that fell from cliffs so high they seemed to touch the clouds. At night, they slept under the stars and made love with the urgency of newlyweds, reminding themselves that the passion between them had not dimmed with time. 20 years, Wade said one evening as they sat by their campfire, Penelope nestled against his side. "Does it feel like that long to you?" "Yes and no," Penelope said. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that we met in Gold Hill. Other times it feels like I have known you forever, like my life before you was just a dream." "A nightmare, more like," Wade said grimly. "Perhaps," Penelope allowed, "but even that had its purpose. If I had not suffered, I would not appreciate what we have. I would not know how precious it is to be loved without fear, to wake up every morning knowing I am safe." Wade kissed the top of her head. "You are safe," he said. "You will always be safe with me." News came occasionally from Nevada. Carried by travelers or letters from acquaintances, they learned that Russell Vaughn had died in a mine collapse 3 years after Penelope left, buried under a ton of rock just as she had once wished. Penelope felt nothing when she heard the news, not satisfaction or grief or even relief. Russell was part of a past so distant it barely seemed real, and she refused to give him any space in her present. As they entered their 50s, Wade's hair went silver, and Penelope's laugh lines deepened into permanent creases. Their children grew into adults who made them proud. William married a rancher's daughter and started his own spread 20 miles north, visiting every Sunday with his growing family. Clara, true to her independent spirit, moved to Sacramento and became a school teacher herself, writing long letters about her students and her work with the suffrage movement that was gaining momentum. Thomas, the unexpected late addition to the family, showed a talent for veterinary medicine and went east to study at a university, something that filled both his parents with awe and delight. The ranch that had once been a dream became a legacy, a place of laughter and hard work and deep satisfaction. Penelope and Wade hired help as they got older, men who reminded them of their younger selves, hungry for opportunity and willing to work for it. They treated their employees fairly, paying good wages and providing decent housing, and in return they earned loyalty that lasted years. On quiet evenings, when the day's work was done and the California sky turned purple with twilight, Penelope and Wade would sit on the porch they had built together and watch the sun set over the hills. Sometimes they talked, reminiscing about the past or planning for the future. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, content in each other's presence. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night we camped in the desert?" Penelope asked one such evening. "You said freedom was nothing between you and the horizon but your own choices." "I remember," Wade said. "I have been thinking about that lately," Penelope continued, "about how we make our own freedom every day with every choice we make. I chose to leave Gold Hill. I chose to trust you. I chose to build this life, to fight for my dreams, to love you with everything I have. And every one of those choices made me more free." "You made me free too," Wade said. "Before I met you, I was just drifting, moving from place to place with no real purpose. You gave me something to care about, something worth fighting for. You gave me a home." Penelope leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and thought about all the miles they had traveled together, both literal and figurative. From Gold Hill to San Francisco, from fear to love, from survival to flourishing. It had been a journey of 1,000 small steps, each one building on the last, until they had created something that would outlast them both. When Penelope turned 60, the community threw her a celebration at the schoolhouse, filling it with former students who had gone on to become teachers and doctors and business owners. They told stories about her patience and her high expectations, and the way she had believed in them, even when they did not believe in themselves. Wade stood at the back of the room, beaming with pride, and when it was his turn to speak, he could barely get the words out through his emotion. "My wife," he said, "is the most remarkable person I have ever known. She has overcome more than most people could imagine, and she has used that pain to make the world better. She has taught hundreds of children, raised 3 incredible kids of her own, and built a ranch that will provide for generations to come. But more than that, she has taught me what real strength looks like. It is not about never falling down. It is about getting back up, over and over again, and refusing to let the world make you bitter or small. Penelope, I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you for 30 more if I am lucky enough to get them." There was not a dry eye in the room, including Penelope's own. They got those 30 years and more. Wade lived to be 83, still riding the ranch boundaries and fixing fences well into his 70s. He died peacefully in his sleep on a warm summer night, Penelope holding his hand, their children and grandchildren gathered around his bed. His last words were, "I love you, my brave girl," and Penelope held those words in her heart like a treasure. She lived another 5 years after Wade's death, years that were lonely but not empty. She continued to teach, to tend her garden, to delight in her expanding family. She traveled to visit Thomas in Boston and was amazed by the tall buildings and the crowds. She went to Clara's suffrage meetings in Sacramento and lived to see California women win the right to vote in 1911, weeping with joy when the news came through. On her last day, surrounded by 3 generations of family in the house she and Wade had built, Penelope felt no fear. She had lived a full life, a good life, a life that mattered. She had known real love and real freedom, and she had helped others find the same. As the sun set on that final evening, casting golden light through the bedroom window, Penelope closed her eyes and heard Wade's voice, as clearly as if he were sitting beside her. "Ready to go, my brave girl?" "Ready," she whispered, and let go. Penelope Vaughn Sutton was laid to rest beside her husband on a hill overlooking the ranch, under an oak tree they had planted together 40 years earlier. Her grandchildren would bring their children to visit, telling them stories about the woman who had escaped from a terrible marriage and built a life of purpose and love. They would tell them about the cowboy who had listened when she could speak again, who had seen her worth and helped her claim her freedom. And in that way, the love story that began in violence and despair, that grew through courage and hope, that flourished in partnership and joy, lived on long after both lovers were gone. It lived on in the ranch that still bore their name, in the school that continued to educate children, in the descendants who carried their strength and kindness forward into the world. The story became legend in that part of California, passed down through generations as a reminder that it is never too late to choose freedom, that real love heals rather than harms, and that the bravest thing any person can do is trust someone else with their broken heart. Years turned into decades, and the ranch saw many changes. William's great-grandson eventually took over the operation, modernizing it with trucks and tractors, but keeping the core values that Wade and Penelope had established. The schoolhouse became a historical landmark, preserved exactly as it had been during Penelope's teaching years, with her handwriting still visible on the chalkboard in the form of a quote she loved. Education is the key that unlocks the golden door of freedom. Tourists would sometimes visit, drawn by the story they had heard about the brave woman who fled an abusive marriage and the noble cowboy who helped her. They would stand at the graves on the hill and imagine what it must have been like, that desperate flight through the desert, that slow building of trust and love, that lifetime of partnership. But the real story was not in the dramatic escape or even in the enduring love, though both were remarkable. The real story was in the thousands of small moments that made up a life together. It was in the way Wade always made sure Penelope's coffee was hot in the morning, and the way Penelope left notes in his saddlebag when he had to be away overnight. It was in the laughter that echoed through their house, in the tears shed over setbacks and losses, in the quiet satisfaction of work well done and dreams achieved. It was in the choice, made fresh every day, to love and be loved, to see and be seen, to listen and be heard. On the centennial anniversary of Penelope and Wade's meeting in Gold Hill, their descendants gathered at the ranch for a reunion. There were more than 100 people present, from infants to octogenarians, all connected by the bond of shared ancestry. They ate barbecue and listened to old stories and marveled at how one woman's courage and one man's kindness had rippled outward to touch so many lives. As the sun set that evening, casting the same golden light that Penelope and Wade had watched thousands of times, a great-great-granddaughter stood at the cemetery on the hill and read aloud from Penelope's journal, which had been preserved by the family. "Today Wade asked me if I was happy," the entry read. "I told him I was happier than I ever imagined possible. He said that was all he wanted, to see me happy and free, but the truth is I'm not just happy because I escaped Russell. I am happy because I found Wade. I am happy because I found myself. I am happy because I learned that love does not have to hurt, that a husband should be a partner and not a jailer, that my voice matters and deserves to be heard. I am happy because I survived, and because I refuse to let my past define my future. If anyone ever reads this, I want them to know you are stronger than you think. You deserve better than cruelty. And somewhere out there is someone who will listen when you finally speak again." The words carried across the hillside, a message from the past to the present, and everyone who heard them felt the truth of it in their bones. The story of Penelope and Wade was not just history. It was a reminder of what was possible when courage met kindness, when desperation met compassion, when brokenness met healing. As the stars came out over the California hills, the same stars that Penelope and Wade had slept under on their journey from Nevada all those years ago, their legacy shone just as bright. A legacy not of wealth or fame, but of love that endured, of freedom that was fought for and won, of two souls who found each other in the darkness and made their own light. And in that light, generations would continue to flourish, carrying forward the lessons learned on a dusty street in Gold Hill, on a day when everything changed, when a cowboy stopped to listen, when a woman found the courage to speak, when two broken people found wholeness in each other and built something beautiful that would never fade. The end of their mortal story was just the beginning of their immortal one, living on in every descendant who chose love over fear, freedom over captivity, hope over despair. Wade and Penelope had planted seeds that would bloom forever, proving that even the darkest beginning can lead to the brightest future, as long as there is one person willing to listen and one person brave enough to speak.